Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is recovery. As you get into camp and get ready for your evening meal, you probably ought to do something to help recover the electrolytes and the fluid that you've lost during the day. How do you judge fluid loss? Well, fluid loss is something that you could judge by getting on a scale before you start, seeing what your weight is, getting off the climb and getting back on the scale and see how much weight you've lost. But that's probably not appropriate for some of our activities. In the meantime, you probably need to realize that you're losing a lot of weight on your climb. Not only are you expending energy and fat and carbohydrates, but you're also using quite a bit of water on your climb. One of the things that I need to emphasize is the fact that if you are sweating during your exercise, you are wasting a resource. You need to slow your pace down to the point where you can maintain your body at the equilibrium so that you're not using a lot of energy to perspire and consequently losing the water also. Water is one of the most important things that you can take on the trip, and it is awkward because it weighs 2 pounds per liter. The recommendation for a day's climb is 5 to 6 liters, or 5 to 6 of those containers to be able to hold the water that you need for your trip. How many of you carry that kind of water? That's about 8 to 10 pounds at least of water that you would have to carry in order to satisfy that requirement. Some of the fast and light guys limit themselves to about 2.5 liters a day. That is, in my opinion, insufficient to be able to maintain body equilibrium. So somewhere in between those two, at about 4 liters is where you probably ought to be with respect to how much fluid you get in you during the day. But how do you carry all of that? Well, how about taking those two off and just carrying those two? Does that sound more reasonable? Okay, that is a better choice as far as the weight and the contents or the capacity of your pack is concerned, but it also leaves you about 2 liters short of water. The solution to that is to take along something to melt snow and create more water so that during your longer break in the middle of the day, you can melt snow and refill your bottles to have the additional fluid that you need on the mountain. Fluid is probably, in my opinion, the most important thing that you can do, but you can overdo it also. You need to be careful about what you drink. If you are drinking pure water, you're losing electrolytes during your exercise. So you need to replace those electrolytes, which pure water does not do. So think about having something that's going to provide electrolytes and additional energy that you can add to your water. I typically, in climbs around here, don't like to carry anything except just water because I feel like I'm going to get the sodium or the other electrolytes out of the food that I'm eating. If you're going overseas, you're probably going to have a filter with you in order to clean your water, and you may not be able to clean your bottles well enough to be able to use the electrolytes in there. There are a couple of different ways that you can approach hydration. I find it completely inconvenient to use a water bottle because that's something that I keep inside my pack, and I don't want to have to stop and take the water bottle out and drink the water. It is inconvenient, and inevitably somebody else is going to want to continue on climbing while I'm trying to get my bottle out and it just doesn't work for me. So I tend to use bladders, but the problem with bladders is that they can't be used effectively in cold temperatures because the water in the tube of the bladder is going to freeze on you. The solution, a partial solution to that, is to, when you finish drinking the water from the tube, to blow the water back up out of the tube. That helps to a certain extent until you get down to about minus 20 degrees, at which point the water is going to freeze inside the mouthpiece itself. So you're probably not going to be able to use a bladder in extremely cold temperatures. Bottle parkas work. The nice part about the bottle parka is that it's not only insulated, but it allows you to put the bottle in upside down. When you put the bottle in upside down, water freezes from the top down. So it's going to freeze up here and leave the water at the bottom of the bottle in liquid form so that you can drink it and then hopefully get the ice out of the bottom of the bottle if it freezes over. So bottle parkas are one solution to your problem with bottles that are still inconvenient and hard to use. Okay. Steve House in the New Alpinism recommends 4 liters of water a day. Anything longer than 4 to 6 hours, you need to mix 6 to 8% solution of carbohydrates and electrolytes with the water. Questions about hydration? I guess I needed to go there. Yes?
If you bring like a jet boil along with like, I don't know, a water bottle or whatever, and mid-climb you want to melt more snow, do you bring your water filter, or do you just pen it, or do you just drink it?
I take the pollution that's in the snow and drink it. And you're going to find that to the extent that you can boil the water, that you're going to kill the microorganisms in the water, in the snow anyway.
I wasn't sure if you would save fuel by just melting it and not boiling it.
If you can do that, yes. Yeah, you'll
Bill,
save fuel that way.
Just add a comment to that. Big difference on where are you and how many other people are there around you. If you Aconcagua, duck behind any rock, and there is a disgusting pile of feces. And I would boil, steri-pen, and filter any water I got out of some camps. On Aconcagua, it was disgusting. If I'm in the middle of a climb and I'm doing an emergency refill, and there's nobody walking around pooping and peeing, then yeah, I'll just melt it and drink the pollution. It's your own comfort level, and it's a little bit of a throw of the dice. I ultimately usually conserve fuel by not bringing everything to a boil on a long trip. But again, if I want something like Rainier, I'm getting 500 people a day up it, yeah, I'm boiling. If I'm on the west buttress of Denali, I'm boiling. But if I'm on the west rib of Denali and I'm the only team for a mile, then not so much.
And one thing that you can do with respect to your ability to recover is to use a recovery solution. If you look at the components here, you're getting about 160 calories, you're getting 30 grams of carbohydrates, you're getting 10 grams of proteins, you're helping your body regenerate and recover from your climb during the day. So recovery is also important with respect to being able to continue your climb up the mountain. I've got a little section on vitamins and minerals. I'm going to be very brief by just saying that vitamins and minerals are a personal kind of thing. You want to avoid any excess, and I probably wouldn't depend on so-and-so said you need to take this and that to climb with. You'll get most of your vitamins and minerals from the food that you're going to eat during the climb. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One of them the young lady brought up is caffeine. Caffeine is something that we talked about at breakfast, having a cup of tea. That's caffeine. Caffeine helps the body to start up in the morning. It's something that gets the mind and body going at the same time. The other components that they're recommending, vitamin I, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is ibuprofen. For muscle aches and recovery, sometimes a vitamin I at night can help you recover. Protein supplements and antioxidants are other things that you can consider, but practically speaking, you need to get most of what you need from the food that you eat. Speaking of food, we talked a little bit about fuel just a couple of minutes ago. The cooking system you use depends on how efficient it is. We talked about white gas and international MSR stoves. If you get those into any kind of wind or breeze, it's going to blow the heat away from where you want the water or the food to be cooking. So I strongly recommend something with a heat exchanger on it, which in many cases is, if I can get it open, is something like a jet boil, because the piece on the bottom of the jet boil down here contains the heat that comes up out of the jet and spreads it evenly across the bottom of the stove. With a jet boil, you can boil 2 cups of water and start your tea brewing. And by the time your tea is brewed, you can have 2 more cups of water and put it into your food for the night. So if you just have to boil water, jet boil is a great way to go. If you have to do any cooking, it's not quite as efficient as some of the other things. And you can get heat exchangers for the pots that Greg was talking about in terms of cooking. So consider doing something like that. If you're having to use that, consider using a wind shield around your stove, if at all possible, to keep that flame coming straight up. We talked a little bit about fuel very briefly. I would use white gas stoves and international stoves if you were going overseas. Greg talked about how dirty the fuel can be in some locations. If you're going to be in the United States, isopropyl butane is relatively easily accessible in most locations, and the canisters are a bit of a problem in terms of carrying them out with you. You don't want to dispose of them in the wilderness, but their inconveniences more than made up for by the efficiency with which they produce the heat that boils your water or cooks your meal. Okay, in terms of packaging, when we went to Aconcagua, we used a system where we put a meal inside a Ziploc bag. And then the number of meals that we had to have, we made up those and distributed them so that each of us had an equal amount of food to be able to carry. But this has got a dinner in it that has that enchilada ranchero, it has the chicken, and it has a energy bar and a recovery packet in there. Those are relatively convenient and can be packaged so that you can write on the outside of it what it is and when it's going to be used. So plan your trip carefully and look through the kinds of things that you are considering for the components and for the things that you need as far as energy as you need on your trip. Okay, finally, you can build a perfect body with the training system, particularly the one recommended by Steve House. But if you don't put fuel in it, that body's not going anywhere. Okay, questions about nutrition? Good, because I can't answer them anyway. I can't hear them. Okay, have a great time and enjoy your climb in the mountains.
So I want to add a comment on caffeine. There's been different theories and research. I actually cut back my caffeine intake going into a trip and try to avoid it. For me, there was some debate over whether caffeine had too much of a diuretic effect and that could impact hydration. What the latest research that I've read says moderate or mild intake of caffeine doesn't create a diuretic effect, but it does increase the urgency with which you need to pee. And sometimes the urgency is enough annoyance for me on a trip that I just don't want to go there. You know, if I got to get out of my sleeping bag, yeah. So that's something that I try to avoid. In large amounts, it can create a diuretic effect. So if you're in the habit of drinking caffeine every day, and you suddenly go cold turkey, then you might get some headaches and side effects and withdrawal, because it's a psychoactive drug, and you withdraw from it. So on the other hand, if you drink a bunch of caffeine, you might feel like you have to pee all the time. And that can get frustrating for your teammates as well as yourself.
So when you drink tea on the mountain, you're drinking tea herbal?
I usually drink herbal, or I'll have a mildly caffeinated tea in the morning. Maybe a cup of hot cocoa. But usually I'm pretty much herbal teas. Questions? A couple other things I'll add comments on. I think that the recovery aspect that Bill was talking about, and I've started to bring, again on a longer trip, or even a fairly short trip, I like a commercial recovery drink. Downside is they're pretty heavy, but it does rebuild the protein, and that's really critical. So, you know, Bill had the one by Cliff there. I use Endurox, something, it's a powder. And there's all kinds of brands out there. Power Bar's got some, Accelerate, but there's a lot of those kind of things. They have some trade-offs in terms of weight, but they do help you get up and go the next day, and that can be really, really critical. Don't underestimate how much protein your body starts to need if you're doing this day after day. Again, one last Shishapangma story is after we got back down into town, we had incredible weather. We finished the climb a week early, so we had time to kill in Kathmandu. And a couple people got early flights out, but there were about 6 of us that went and found a local gym in Kathmandu. We decided to go, let's go do a light workout and see what that feels like a couple of days after coming off the peak. So it was kind of funny. It was like a 1970s, you know, all barbells and dumbbells and weights. But they had a pull-up bar in the gym. And so 6 guys, all climbers, all pretty good, well-conditioned athletes. Between us, I think we mustered 15 pull-ups. Because when your body stops getting food in it, it starts eating itself. And when it needs protein, and it doesn't want carbohydrates anymore, it needs protein to recover, it takes the muscles in your upper body and transfers the protein down to your lower body. So literally, I could pull off, I think I'd managed 1.5, maybe 2 pull-ups after coming down off that peak. And that was it. And I mean, I don't do massive amounts of pull-ups, but 1.5 to 2 is not my norm. So it's amazing how much protein your body can take for recovering. Okay. Any other questions on the food and nutrition aspect? left over. Okay, one thing, speaking to my bias about having some real food and testing yourself, one of the purposes of the camp out that we go on is to check out your systems and maybe try some things that you haven't in a fairly safe environment. So what I am going to put in place for when we go out on our overnight in February is that you will have at least one meal that does not require, that is not commercial freeze-dried, that you will create something. Just to see what it's all about. Try to get creative and get there.
When you say commercial freeze-dryers, you mean like a mountain house? Can I make something with ramen or rice or?
Try to make something. Yeah, I mean, you could do something with ramen or rice. Try to be a little creative is what I'm really pushing. Is.
Are you saying that's not creative enough?
I say, you know, it's not like I will stand there with a checklist and say you fail. What I'm suggesting is that you try to push your envelope a little bit and try to create something. Because again, there's a lot of benefits to the cook it and eat it out of the bag mountain house. But on the other hand, there's a lot of benefits to moving away from that and trying some different things.
There's some great websites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're into dehydrating, I think it's still in print. The original book that I found on it, The Hungry Hiker's Guide to Good Cooking. I'll put a link. I'll put that out on email. I'll have to find the author's name. But that even has directions on how to make your own home dehydrator if you're really hardcore. Actually, I don't know if it worked anymore because it required an incandescent light bulb. And I don't think you can find, you needed a 150-watt incandescent light bulb. So I don't know if modern light bulbs put off enough heat. Can't do it anymore. Okay. A couple other things, just adding to what Bill talked about a little bit, but some of the decision making I'm going to kind of segue towards next week when we're talking about group dynamics and planning and preparation. Food is a big item to talk about. Are you going to do group meals? Are you going to do individual meals? There's a lot of benefits each way. A lot of trips, you know, if everybody kind of likes their own stuff, it's great. Everybody brings their own individual thing, and you're just sharing stoves, and it can work really well. On the other hand, if you have some group meals, I know some friends who were doing a Denali trip, and they wanted to do a group dinner every night. Because they had about 6 people in 3 different tents. And they said, if we do a group dinner every night, then every night we all get to see each other and talk to each other and check in on each other. So there can be some safety benefits to eating as a group. Sometimes just tastes are different. I remember we ended up on the summit push on Shishapangma, we ended up dividing up somewhat by who liked what kind of food. Because we're cooking our own food on the way up there. So I ended up with a guy who I shared food taste with. So there are a lot of factors in terms of team dynamics. Other question that sometimes come up internationally, if you have particular dietary needs. Again, if you're dealing with some kind of a commercial expedition, or you're hiring a cook, which is something I like to do a lot in South American trips, you're probably okay saying vegetarian. You're probably not going to get vegan, doubtful, maybe, you know, and somebody that deals with a lot of Americans might be able to handle a vegan menu. Gluten-free, you can forget it. Not going to happen. You know, other things that we nitpicky Americans deal with about our food, you know, forget it. You really, that's one of the things, you know, that's where you look at, and again, looking ahead to next week, what style are you going to go in? Are you going to bring your own stuff? And I know a lot of people who bring their own stuff. just because they don't trust whatever the outfitter is going to give them, because they have particular tastes. You definitely don't get experimental. I always wait till after the mountain to get experimental with the local cuisine. You know, I'll go real safe until I've made the climb. And then what the heck? Let's try the local vegetables, sure. Yeah, of course then, yeah. I won't wow you with my being, food poisoning on an airplane. Bad things. All right.